I'm Dean Safola, and this is the Azure Academy. So today we're going to be talking about Azure Backup. So in general, why do we need backups? Well, it's because stuff happens. And sometimes systems stop working, files get corrupted, we need to get back to that known good state. And for years across the enterprise, we've had a lot of backup tools provided by a lot of vendors. And that could have been anything from simple homegrown scripts to a solution like Veeam or Commvault, Symantec, Tivoli, just to name a couple. Microsoft has also been in the backup game for a long time, and we have had a product called System Center Data Protection Manager, or DPM. Now, if we have all of these kind of baked in big fat applications that do all this great stuff, why then should we have a cloud-based backup at all? Well, I can answer that in two words: scale and flexibility. So Azure Backup is a PaaS service. PaaS, again, stands for Platform as a Service, and it's where Microsoft will handle all of the infrastructure and everything that's required behind the scenes. All you do is manage some basic stuff, configuration, backup policies, data retention, and then when the service needs to scale to accommodate the workload that you've asked, it just does so on demand. So I say that the scenario is scalable. Flexibility was the other word. There is a ton of options related to backups across Azure Backup. And let's take a look at our Azure Backup documentation. And we've landed on our Getting Started page. We're going to go to Products. And then on the bar here on the side, we're going to go to Management Tools. You can see we have a lot of different management tools, and these are all kind of PaaS services, but we're going to focus on backup today. So here we are on our Quick Start page. You can do stuff in the portal, PowerShell, Azure CLI, even templates. You can deploy backup with templates and onboard systems through templates at their deployment time, and we'll get into more of that a little bit later. So for now, let's go to our overview on the left, and we'll look at what is Azure Backup. And so this section we've talked about a little bit already, so I want to jump right down to what Azure Backup can do. These are the use cases that we've planned for, and everything from agents that go on systems to Data Protection Manager. These are the different scenarios that each one of these things do. IaaS VM backup, which we're going to focus a lot on today. And if we go a little further down, there are these deployment scenarios related to each component. So what would be the best use of a backup scenario for files and folders? Well, we have Azure Backup, DPM, the Azure Backup Server. Same thing across Hyper-V, VMware, SQL, SharePoint, Exchange, basic general purpose virtual machines, storage support for Windows, support for Linux. The Azure Backup Service covers a wide breadth and has a lot of different tools, ways to help you get protected. So I'd encourage you to look over this list, use this list to find the workload you're interested in and the solution that will be enabled by that workload. So here we are in our Azure Academy resource group, and we're going to create ourselves a recovery services vault for backups. So in the marketplace, add, and we type in backup. Okay, and we'll select Backup and Recovery and click Create. And there's only a couple options here. We just need to give it a name, a subscription, a resource group, and a location. So the location is going to be defaulted to when we select our resource group, but you don't have to put it there, but you do have to have it in the same region where the resources are that you want to back up. All right, so let's look at our automation options while we're sitting here, as I did mention templates. So that's it. That's all that you need to deploy a backup vault. Okay, now this doesn't have policies yet, but you can see there's only a couple parameters. And you could even hard code some of these like the API version if you wanted to. And let's look at our parameters file section here for a second. And you can see there are the parameters we just provided. The name, AA Backup Vault, East US, and let's create this thing. And we'll sort it by type again just to keep things neat. And in another second or two, it'll be done. And there it is. All right, so let's click on this. And like every other resource, on the left side we have our blade, and it starts off the same way at the top, but notice now we've got some multiple options here: backup and replicate, and backup and site recovery. So I want to make the clear distinction that backup and disaster recovery are not the same thing. Backup can be a part of your business continuity or disaster recovery protections, but backup is something separate altogether. Backup is something you do on a daily basis, weekly basis, hourly basis. BCDR is something you initiate in case of a disaster. So with that said, we'll cover more on site recovery in another video. So let's look at what we have here in the rest of our blade. So we've got some properties and locks, automation script, and then we have our getting started, which we'll look at in a second. Then we have jobs for all the different things, policies, which we'll come back to, protected items, and we have our management. So we're going to look at backup infrastructure management. And when it comes to stuff in the cloud, we only have to look at backup configuration. Now, the two types of storage replication are locally redundant and geo-redundant. So to cover this again, just real quickly, we have to talk a little bit about Azure regions and how Azure is set up to scale and protect your assets when you're in the cloud. So we'll open our favorite search engine, which of course is Bing, and we'll type in Azure paired regions. And let's look at our article here in our Azure documentation. So we start off with the largest construct, which is the geography. This would be like Asia, North America, etc. And within that geography, we have regions and regional pairs. And that's East US and West US in our case. And so there's data centers in each, multiple data centers that are within each region. Each region is then in a pair. Each pair is in a geography. So here's the full list of all of the regions and their pairs, and that's for all of Azure, including the sovereign clouds. And here is an example of which kind of systems are paired to the other regions and the kind of distances we keep in mind to keep local catastrophes from impacting more than one region, etc. So we have, in our case, related to backup, we have to deal with storage. So our storage in one region is going to be geo-replicated to another region, or it's going to stay in one region only. Okay, and you just have to decide if you need it just in one region or if you want it copied over to the other region to be replicated. This is for Microsoft to protect your data. This is not something that you will have direct access to. This is in case we have a data center outage in a region that we can know that we've kept your data safe. And to date, Microsoft has never lost anyone's data. I'm not concerned with that in my lab, so I'm just going to choose locally redundant storage because I don't need geo-redundancy at this point. All right, and so while we're here, let's take a look at some of the other stuff. We're not going to deal with it in this video, but just so you know where it is. So the backup management server, this is Azure Backup Server that's registered with this backup vault. So we don't have any. We're not using that in this scenario. And then it'll tell you about all the things that Azure Backup Server is protecting. Okay, now what we will look at is our storage accounts, because we'll be dealing with this later. And this is where a storage account that you register with the Azure Backup Service to protect file shares in that storage account would be registered. We don't currently have any, but we will as we onboard one later in this video. So with that, let's get started and let's back up some stuff. So we're going to back up a system. So we have to decide first, is this an on-premise system or one in Azure? So for on-prem, we've got a bunch of options. These are related to the Mars agent, which is files and folders, or the Azure Backup Server, which would then back up a lot of our other things. We can back up Hyper-V VMs right from the hypervisor, or VMware systems. We can also back up SQL servers that are on-prem, SharePoint, Exchange, do full system state backups of systems, do bare metal recovery of physical systems. So a lot of options on-prem, but today we're talking about the cloud. So virtual machines is what we're going to start with, but there is also Azure file shares, which we could back up, and we talked about that. And then there is also SQL Server running in a Azure IaaS VM. So for right now, just virtual machine, and we'll hit backup. So the only thing that we really have to figure out now that we have a vault is what policy do we want? We get a default, but let's create a new one. So first thing you have to figure out is, do we want this to be daily or a weekly backup? Just depends on how often you need this VM protected. And then you can pick whatever time you like. Let's pick one early in the morning so no one's going to be using it. And I'll set my time zone for Eastern because that's where I'm at. And then you have to pick a name, and we'll say socks. And then what are the recovery points that we want? So a recovery point is, at what point do I want to go back? So I'm going to say that I could go back a certain number of days, weeks, months, years, or some combination of all of them, which is what we're going to do. So what I like to do generally is set it to be the number just above what's in that particular category. So there's 7 days in a week or 31 days in a month. So I'm going to say 32 just so I go over the 31 days that are in a month. And then there's 4 weeks in a month, so we'll say 5. And then there's 12 months in a year, so we'll say 13. Now, years are very cool because we can have a maximum of 99 years. You may not be here when we need to restore this data, but the data will still be here. So I think that's a great feature. Now, with all of these recovery points, another thing you need to be aware of is you can have a maximum of 9,999 individual recovery points per VM. So you need to just plan for how many years that's going to be to know when any particular recovery point is just going to roll off the back, and you won't be able to restore that far back. So this looks good for right now. So let's hit OK, and we'll proceed to protect the VM. Okay, now here's where we can choose one or multiple VMs to back up. We're just going to start with one for now, because we'll take care of the other one later in a different method. And we'll just hit OK. Okay, so this VM is on its way to being protected. So let's look at our job. Our system has been onboarded, and that took 30 seconds, and this system is now going to be protected by our backup. So let's take a look at our backup protected items. And as you can see, we have many different types of items that we can protect. And we'll look at our Azure VMs. And the status that we have here is warning initial backup pending. So at this point, we can wait for the system to reach its policy period, and then it will back up automatically. Or we can back it up right now, which is what we're going to do. Now, this is one of those manual or ad hoc backups that I was talking about. When you do this, you have to pick how long do you want this manual backup to be retained for. And you can go as far as you like, up to 99 years. So we'll say March 2021, just cause. All right, so that job is now running. And if we go back to our backup jobs, you see that job's in progress. So an initial backup takes somewhere between usually 20 minutes to an hour, depending on how much data you have. But this is a non-intrusive backup. There's no agent that's inside the operating system. There's no performance impact while a backup is being taken. What's happening behind the scenes is kind of like a snapshot of a virtual machine. And then that snapshot is moved from the region where, or the storage, I should say, where the VM lives to the backup account storage. Okay, so as we move that data from the managed disk storage account to the backup storage account, that's what's going to take the majority of the time. The snapshot itself is very quick. Now, what kind of backup is this taking? Because there are many different kinds of backups. So that, of course, is in our documentation. And we look here. The kind of backup that we do is first an initial full backup, and then we do incrementals. Okay, and as it explains here in the documentation, if you know what incrementals are versus differentials, then that all makes sense to you. And basically, it's just we take the backup and then how many changes have there been since the backup took place. Okay, and then those changes are then backed up. So it is a snapshot that builds on other snapshots, and we can have a maximum of 9,999 snapshots for a single VM. Okay, so getting back here, this backup job again will take a little while to complete. So let's move on and do something else. So one of the other things that we talked about was the ability to back up a storage account. Okay, now here we have a storage account, and this was created for doing monitoring of our VMs. And when it comes to storage accounts in relation to Azure Backup, even though there are 4 types of storage accounts, blobs, which is block level objects, files, tables, and queues, only one of them at this point really relates to Azure Backup, and that would be files. So blobs are for things like data files related to monitoring, log analytics, that kind of thing. Also virtual hard drives. So your managed disks live in blob storage. Your tables and queues are usually related to more app developer type work. Tables are like NoSQL type database, and queues are usually related to messages. So files is what we want to focus on because that's related to Azure Backup in this video. So we'll go into files, and this is where you can have a SMB file share that is based on Azure Storage. You can connect this file share to your Windows 10 or Server 2016-2012 environments on-premise or in the cloud. You can also connect it to things that are older like Windows 8, Windows 7, but they need to support the SMB 3.0 protocol, and Windows 7 doesn't do that by default. So you need to stand up a file server in between that could actually host those file shares locally on-prem for you. But that's another story. So in Azure Files, let's create ourselves a file share, and we'll call this, let's see, Azure 0 file share. Okay, so that's a valid name, but I want to point out to you that if you had something like a capital letter, that is not valid. Neither are any of our symbol friends. So, but this is a valid file name, all numbers or letters, all lowercase. Now quotas, we could have a 1 gig file share, or a 10 gig file share, 100 gig file share, terabyte file share. In fact, we can go up to 5 terabytes in a single file share right now. And like everything else in Azure, the limits are constantly going up, so I wouldn't be surprised if this doubled or tripled or even more in the next several months. So let's create our file share. And just like that, 5 terabytes. That's the beauty of using cloud storage. So now that we have this, let's actually load up a file or two. And so let's see, we're going to upload a file, and we'll find that file. Here, let's take this, and we'll upload it. There we go. Now, backups can be done in a few ways with Azure Files. First of all, we could take a snapshot here ourselves. Let's create a snapshot. Oh, there you go, it's already done. Well, that's great. So, can I just use that? Well, yeah, you can, but this is you manually doing snapshots. Azure Backup is going to give us a bunch more functionality. So let's go back to our Recovery Services Vault, and this time we'll hit our plus backup to start a new backup workload, and we'll pick a Azure file share. So it's going to go through and detect our storage accounts, and here's ours. And then it's going to detect what shares are on that storage account. Okay, and there's our Azure file share that we just created. We'll hit OK to that. And now we have to pick a backup policy. Now we don't have any other policies for files, so we'll have to create one. Share policy. Okay, there we go. And we'll do this at the end of our day, say 10 p.m. And we'll say 120 days. And we're going to enable backup. All right, now this job is running. Okay, and now it's complete and our backup of our file share has been registered. So let's look at our backup items. And now we have a VM and a file share. So if we click on this, and again, it says warning, initial backup not taken. We hit backup now, and sure, that date's fine. We'll just hit OK. And then if we get back there fast enough, backup job. Oh, our backup's already complete. So it takes storage backups that quickly, 3 seconds, and it's backed up. So essentially this is taking a snapshot backup just like we did. But now it has specific retention policies around it, it has scheduling around it, and all the work is done for you. You can still go in and take manual backups or manual snapshots if you want. Go back to my protected items, back to my file share, and notice my status has changed to success because that was my last backup. And I'll do a backup now. There you go, another backup done manually, or I could still do it the snapshot way like we did earlier. All right, so what else can we do? So let's look at another backup solution, and this is doing things with the Mars backup agent. Now the backup agent currently is only written for Windows. So if you want to have file and folder level protection inside a virtual machine or inside a on-premise system, you can do that with the Mars agent. Okay, and so what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to download under my properties in my Recovery Services Vault, download my Recovery Services agent. And I'll save that to my OneDrive, Azure Backup. Okay. And then we're going to check this box and hit download. This is going to download our backup vault credentials so that we can connect to our backup vault. Okay, those are done. And if we look at our Windows system, now we have this installer and this backup agent. Now, the installer itself is an exe, and the install switch would be just like doing any other scripted MSI-based install. But I'm going to just walk through it manually. And this will just take a few seconds. So the default install location is fine for me, and I don't have a proxy, and it's going to update me if I'm not already updated to having Windows PowerShell version 5.1 and .NET Framework 4.5. Okay, so now this proceed to registration. What this is going to do is ask us for our vault credentials, which we have in here. And that's registering to our backup vault with our Azure subscription in our region. You don't have to put in a passphrase here. We can generate one automatically for you. And then we can save this to any particular location you like. And I'll put it back in the same place, Azure Backup. And we'll hit finish. And now it's going to register this Windows 10 system with Azure Backup. Incidentally, while we're waiting for this, let me show you the requirements. How to back up a Windows server. And this talks about the process And again, like I told you, the documentation is great. Everything that you need to do in the exact order you need to do it is all right here. All right, so there is right here. This is what I was looking for. So network and connectivity requirements. So the basic requirement for the VMs or Windows servers or Windows 10 systems on-prem is that you can reach these URLs. Okay, so if you have some kind of proxy, internet filter, firewall, you need to just be sure that you can reach these, and as long as you can, the service will be registered and everything will work. All right, so let's go back and cool, that's done. So let's launch. Looks a lot like Windows Backup. Well, that's because it is. So now we've got our system set up, so let's schedule a backup. All right, so what is it we want to back up? Well, let's say on our C drive, let's back up our temp directory because there's not much in that, it'll happen quickly. When do we want to do this? Let's say 4 o'clock and 8 o'clock. While we're at it, 10 o'clock, 10:30. So 3 times a day, that folder is going to get backed up. Now, what do we want our retention policies to be? Looks a lot like everything that we've already seen in Azure Backup because it's the same service. And I'm just going to leave these as default and back this up automatically over the network versus taking a offline backup. And then we'll hit finish. So it's going to stream those files live over the network to Azure Backup automatically. Now I can also hit backup now. So we'll hit backup. Taking a snapshot of my C temp directory, which there's not much in it, maybe a couple hundred kilobytes. Okay, there was more data in there than I thought. 13 megs, and that finished in about a minute. So we'll hit close, backup job complete. That's great. Let's take a look back at our vault. So now, if I go back to my overview, you can see now that we have 3 protected items. Azure Files, an Azure Backup Agent, and a Windows VM. So if we look at our Azure Backup Agent, C drive, the name of my server, or my Windows 10 system is HAL. You're welcome. And so that's it. We're all done. And this is all managed through the backup agent that we already installed. So that's awesome. What about SQL? Well, we can do SQL too. So for that, we're going to have to build ourselves a SQL server. So let's go back to Azure Academy and add. And we'll add SQL 2017 Enterprise. All right, and we'll say that's on server 2016 and create. And we've done this before, so I'll walk through this quickly. Okay, so our SQL VM is provisioned, and let's go back to our Azure Academy resource group, and we'll go back to our backup vault. And now, as a IaaS VM running SQL, let's onboard a new VM. Okay, so the first thing that's going to happen is we start a discovery process. So it's going to look at our VMs that are running in Azure. So this will take a few seconds. Okay, so our discovery has found our VMs, and we're going to check our SQL box and hit Discover DBs. Now while this is going, we're going to hit the View Details button, and it's going to show us all of the databases that are in this particular VM, or these multiple VMs that we've selected. And this will again take a few seconds. Okay, so our discovery of our databases is finished, and that took about 2.5 minutes. So let's configure our backups. All right, so it's going to show us the server and all of the relevant databases. So we're just going to back up all of them. So now we have a new kind of backup policy. This is hourly. This is basically your log backups, and this is how we're going to be able to do normal SQL transactional database type logging. So we'll just say OK to our hourly policy and hit Enable Backup. Okay, so those databases are being onboarded. Now, while that's happening, I'll show you the other way that we can onboard systems. And we'll take our domain controller, since we haven't backed that guy up yet. And inside the VM blade, we have backups. Okay, so it's already got our Azure Backup Recovery Vault, and let's pick our, oh, I guess we didn't spell SOX correctly. It's our SOS policy. Let's go, because it's 99 years, it's better than SOX. So, and then we'll hit our validating button here, which will then do our onboarding of this system to backups, so you can control backup deployment at the individual VM level, or, as you've seen, we can do multiple VMs at once through the Azure Backup Vault. So you can use this as a way to separate responsibilities. Say you guys are in charge of your own VMs, so onboard your systems to backup, or you can have a backup team who would be responsible for backups all up across the enterprise, who could onboard all the VMs and don't need direct access to the VMs to do all that. All right, so let's go back to our vault. And now we have 7 protected items. So we've got 3 SQL databases, 2 virtual machines, and a storage account, and a backup agent that's on my Windows 10 system. And you can see here our scheduled backup happened as it was supposed to. So now we've got a recovery point for the one that we did manually to kick it off, as well as a recovery point for the scheduled backup. So that's it for this video. I know we've covered a tremendous amount of stuff, and I'm sure you're saying, well, wait a minute, what about file restores? What about Linux? What about, okay, we'll get to it in our next video. We'll see you then.